what I do have actually is a really funny would you rather question.
Alright, go on.
I heard it on what's it called, Your Mum's House podcast.
Okay.
And it's
kick things off.
Would you rather run everywhere? No walking, just running all the time, no matter what. Like, so you run to the toilet in the morning, or just to kind of run down a queue, or run to the bank or something like that, or just shout all the time. No matter what, there's no control of your voice. You're just shouting all the time.
I don't know actually. That is a tricky one, isn't it? Because neither is particularly life-ruining, is it? It's just a massive inconvenience. So which one do you go for?
You're a toddler either way as well. You just kind of
probably shout.
Yeah, probably but I mean, you can't even whisper or anything like that, or just kind of someone to say hello to you, or if you're in bed with a woman, just
I don't know. You can get by with that. I feel having a shouty conversation is unpleasant for the other person, but if you're trying to walk somewhere with someone, but you're running, then it
but there's that. But then also you can have a conversation with people, like a normal one, and you won't have to someone gives you a call and you answer. You just
but not if you've ran off.
Yeah, I mean there's that, but then you're always healthy as well, until you just get worn out. But
well, that's true.
You're gonna force him to do exercise all the time.
Which one would you rather?
I think I'd go with the running.
Okay.
I think it's funnier as well, because you just look insane. I mean, you look insane with both, because you're either just shouting at the top of your voice all the time. You're just running around like the supermarket like a toddler. Picking things up. There's no in between.
So we've got split opinions on that one then.
Yeah.
Put the question out to our avid listeners and see what they think.
Yeah. Avid listener being me when I re-listen to it, just to kind of
decide that none of it's usable.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from that then.
Yeah.
What's today's topic of conversation?
Well, we briefly discussed consciousness, but then that's a really random and heavy subject to segue into from talking about that would you rather question.
And we'll make that seamless transition there into talking about.
I feel like it helps the transition if you acknowledge how abrupt the transition is.
And that's what we've just done. That was the technique that we used there.
Yeah. So, your opinion on consciousness?
It's a complicated one. I'm not nearly qualified enough to offer really meaningful theories on it, because people just don't understand what it is. There's an interesting theory I heard on a podcast I listened to the other day about everything having consciousness to some degree. So because humans and the human brain is so infinitely complex and well engineered by nature, you have consciousness to the extent that you can live and feel and think independently, whereas even something as large as a mountain is not nearly as complex as the human brain. So it has consciousness, just not anything near what we can measure, which would explain why animals can kind of have consciousness to a certain extent, or why things in space, like stars for example, seem to have an element of consciousness and unpredictability about them.
What do you mean by that?
What, in terms of stars having consciousness? Yeah. Well, they just behave in a certain way, they're unpredictable. Like there's still people trying to work out the way stars work.
I'm not sure whether they're unpredictable.
It's not a question of free will as such, but it's complicated because our notions of consciousness, I think, are bound up in our own experience of consciousness, i.e. free will and
without that.
Thinking and self-awareness and things, whereas at a lower level it probably would be entirely different.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I suppose the free will does come into it a little bit, but I don't necessarily believe in free will in the sense that most people think.
That's an interesting tangent.
Yeah, I suppose I feel like we perhaps need to talk about that before we move on to the consciousness thing again, I'll move back to it. But I feel that free will is literally just, there isn't free will, because all you are is a culmination of all your life's experiences, which cause you to think in a certain way. So when you think back to a situation where you think perhaps you may have done something else, you perhaps regret it, that you would never have got that opportunity because everything up until that point in your life has led you to think the way you think.
Well, yeah, so this is kind of playing on the hindsight idea, isn't it? So, were you given that chance again without the benefit of hindsight, chances are you'd probably make the same decision again, because regrets and beliefs thereafter are coloured by your experiences subsequently, aren't they?
Yeah, but I don't think that necessarily constitutes free will. Having hindsight, because then if you've got hindsight, you've got more information.
Well, yeah.
Because you know what you want to happen, and you know what will happen, or the effects of what you choose to do. So then you're not going to make any other choice unless you're just wired differently. But I don't necessarily think it's a choice.
So you think things are predestined, or
not necessarily predestined? Because I think you can be you can be active and you can make decisions and you can do the right thing and you can be moral and ethic, but then it's
but you kind of preconditioned to make a decision a certain way, whether or not you have the freedom to make another decision, make a different choice. You're preconditioned to make a certain choice because of the experiences and things that you've undergone.
Yeah, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I get that.
That's why I don't necessarily believe in regret, because all regret is just a function of your brain to remember a danger of the past kind of thing, so you make sure it doesn't happen again.
If you treat everything as a learning experience, that's a much more healthy way, I think, of.
Well, I think that's the fundamental. Things, that's the fundamental reason why we have that kind of thing. Because if there was no consequences for our actions, then we wouldn't remember anything. We wouldn't have mistakes. We just. The reason why we feel like we have mistakes is because we want a different outcome in the future, or it's worth remembering.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, because all the way back, to when we just kind of traveled, little pockets of tribes and stuff dotted around the world, it was kind of survival. You learned your environment. You thought, if a bush rustles at night when you're on watch, kind of thing, looking after your family, you're going to think, okay, well that's not normal, or that sound doesn't sound like it has sounded in the past, or anything like that.
I think
that's all memory was, to begin with.
I think that calls into question, in a sense, the idea of consciousness, because what it is, in many ways, or what you could say it is as a symptom of life in general, is something that is not governed solely by the laws of physics and chemical reactions, and something which is almost bound to happen according to a chain reaction stretching back. So everything almost that doesn't involve conscious decisions, even small animals can make those. Everything that doesn't involve that is kind of the result of chemical reactions that just happen and are not therefore avoidable in a sense.
Yeah, I think there is that. I think with the whole animal thing, with the whole consciousness thing, I think there's a good. People say that we could be in a simulation kind of thing. You don't know. You can't possibly know whether or not we're in a simulation. Although I think there are some good arguments, but I've not read up on them or seen them or heard them. But if that were true, or if that's the case, then really the only thing we know to be real is that we're experiencing something, or we're conscious of what we're experiencing.
Well, this comes back to the I think therefore I am thing, doesn't it? That's the only thing we can be possibly sure of, is that we exist and we have the capacity to think. Whether we're living in a reality or a simulation of a reality is very difficult to prove, but we can prove at least that we do exist and we are capable of independent thought.
Or at least our consciousness exists.
It's entirely possible that we're just ones and zeros. But
yeah. That'd be bizarre. But We could be creating that world with all this kind of rapid technological advancement.
We touched on this last time, didn't we?
Very briefly.
With artificial intelligence. Whether we'll ever create artificial consciousness is the big question, isn't it? Because I've no doubt we'll. And most scientists, I think, seem to be in agreement that we'll very soon create machines that are cleverer than us, intellectually speaking, but will they be conscious? Will they be capable of independent thought, or just doing what they're programmed to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the definition of consciousness.
Well, yeah, but that brings us back to the initial point, doesn't it? But I think that's why there's such such a big emphasis at the moment on trying to find out what consciousness is, because at some point, probably in the quite near future, we're going to have to grapple with it in the context of artificial intelligence.
Well, yeah, because we're kind of got to face the fact that we're essentially, as a species, creating a god or something with godlike powers because it can do something that's just so crazy to us. Like 10,000 years of worth of research in weeks or less. That's a kind of advancement that we can't even comprehend. I mean, people struggle with the advancements today. People have no idea the impact of things like social media and stuff, which are really new, really young, but have such a massive impact on culture and society. But people don't realise. I think it's kind of just, it's Facebook. It's where my family posts shit. I don't really care about them, keep in touch with people.
We do live in a sort of a bubble in our own age, and this is true of any age, really, I think. So, people 100 years ago thought that the telegraph was going to be the most revolutionary thing going for the next millennia or whatever, and even as recently as the 90s, people thought the fax machine was going to completely revolutionise the way people communicate, but within a decade it had been obsolete. So, it's entirely possible, I think, within 100 years that there'll just be millions of derelict Facebook accounts, and it's just a footnote in history. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but it's entirely possible, because your frame of perspective is always on you view the future in terms of a progression of what you currently experience.
Yeah, I think I do think for the first time in history that we can't necessarily predict where things are going to go. I think in the past you had very clear kind of paths of where things are moving and all these kinds of things. The whole thing with the fax machine, technically it did, because you could send documents over, thousands of miles and that kind of crap. That's that whole kind of global communication thing is now in its current form, which it is with social media and the internet and stuff like that. But it was kind of a clear path. But at this point right now, I think it's incredibly broad. I know there's scientists looking for we have a theory of evolution and how, I don't know if it's full bulletproof, but the theory of evolution, kind of how you can see how species develop and how they got to where they were, based on all these different things. But we don't necessarily have I don't want to say theory of technology, but that's the only way. It's the easiest way to put it. It's a bad term, but it's kind of because you can't necessarily predict how a technology is going to be used. I mean, when it was just a physicist with good intentions that created nuclear physics, and then it got created into
technology is a lot more volatile because it progresses at such a more rapid rate. Like evolution itself is governed by natural laws, isn't it? And it's far too slow to possibly observe.
Yeah.
Whereas technology is so wily and fast moving that it could go off in any direction. You never particularly know. So in that sense, I think it's difficult to predict, especially because it's it accelerating at such an increasing pace. But
yeah, there's not much time to adjust for anything, or really kind of in the immediate see the impact of this kind of rapid change and iteration of how we interact with each other. And I think there's kind of an interesting difference between even us who are in our 20s and our parents who are 40s and 50s. I think the difference in perspective is so crazy different. It's so vast, because I think they definitely grew up with a kind of countrywide perspective or a nationwide perspective in terms of their issues and the kind of relationship with the outside world. But for us, who kind of are one of the first native internet generations, kind of thing, where we have we can communicate with anybody in the world easily, pretty much, and we can find opinions from anybody in the world, and we can find life experiences from anybody in the world. And more we are facing things like climate change, which does affect the whole world. So I think we're going to be very much one of the first generations that are very globalistic in their outview, considering everybody, like regardless of borders, like for the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be, but then humans have a natural inclination towards conflict and stuff, just because that's the way we kind of built the whole tribalism thing.
Technology and globalisation just make that gap ever wider in a smaller space of time, don't they? So, in 100 years ago, for example, the gap, the cultural gap and the gap of perspective between us and our parents' generation would have been between generations 100 years apart, and not too many centuries before that it would have been maybe 300 or 400 years apart. And for most of human history it's just been entirely the same perspective between generations, purely because the rate of technological progress has been very, very slow, whereas now, for many reasons, it's increasing so rapidly that I think we'll get to the point where a single year between people being born will be enough to give them such a different perspective on the world.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there is a singularity in terms of the whole kind of half-life of technology, I think.
Yeah.
But and I think people are starting to say that that's what we're coming to. That's what we're starting to reach.
To the point where we can't increase the speed of progression anymore.
Until a new technology gets developed or something like that. Well, I mean, with the processor, they got to the fastest they can be, kind of thing, or within a certain kind of capacity or in one form. And then it was developed where you could have two processors working together or something like that, and then you had another kind of peak, and then
so something plateaus until someone thinks of a more novel way of progressing it than just the classical way, and then that has its run as well.
I mean, the technological advancement is kind of crazy. I mean, if you think about the difference between, like, when there was no phones or no electricity or anything like that kind of thing, it's only like, when was electricity invented? It was like...
It was discovered about I don't actually know this, because I think it was discovered a long time ago, but only really utilised for the first time in about the mid-19th century.
Right. I'll Google
There's this belief in America, isn't there, that Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity.
Yeah. So around like the 1800s or 1900s.
Well, yeah, it's still obvious here that Michael Faraday was one of the first people to be able to harness electricity, for human purposes, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, discovers a better term than invented. Rather invented the harnessing of the electricity. But yeah, so that's like 200 years ago. That's essentially, by today's standards, two people living to a full life and dying. And you can see two people in front of you. And to me, that kind of blows my mind.
There's two generations as well.
Yeah.
Whose lives will overlap.
Yeah.
Potentially, yeah.
And kind of in terms of the perspective of the world and how dinosaurs were like millions of years and whatnot, kind of crap, and just how old the Earth is.
About human terms,
the extreme rapid development of the human race is kind of crazy. Because if you saw the generations of people standing side by side, people are like, fuck, it's like 10 people, shit.
Yeah.
You know.
They say the best kind of example, if you like, of that is powered heavier than air flight, isn't it? In the space of 60 years or so, we went from the Wright brothers to stuff like Concorde,
Yeah.
And being in space as well. It's just
Yeah, no, it's completely mad. I've got another good example of that. Is a film. I think it was like in 1902. You had the Great Train Robbery. I think the Great Train Robbery. It was quite a big film at the time. I think it was directed by I can't remember his name. I quoted him in my dissertation for uni. But anyway, it was kind of like, it was revolutionary for a number of reasons, because it kind of had, it was the first. I mean, most, like, from the very beginning of film, it was kind of treated like theatre. We had one scene that would change, and just one camera steps, like, watching it.
Yeah.
And it would be like a theatre show. But this was the first time where it kind of had two separate stories going parallel, and subsequent scenes that would happen like continually. So you started off with the robbers robbing and all this kind of robbing a bank, I think it was, and then them going to a train and robbing the train and stuff, and then halfway through it shows the sheriffs and police officers, all that stuff. There'll be sheriffs back in that time. Like, all kind of crowded up in a room kind of thing, and they get the call to go out because the train's getting robbed, and they all run, and it's kind of like, it's done in parallel. It's stuff you take for granted
narrative
nowadays.
Arc, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually got plots and jumps and all that kind of stuff, and that was revolutionary. But the thing that was kind of interesting about this is it had an extra scene where there was it was given with the film to all the theatres, and the projectionist could choose to put it either at the beginning or the end. And it was a scene where the main protagonist, or main antagonist, the main leader of the bandits, was facing the camera and facing the screen, kind of like from the waist up, and he kind of raised his gun towards point blank at the screen and fired. And that scared the shit out of people because they thought they were getting shot at. Because they'd never seen someone interact with that through the fourth wall with that before, and there's even stories of people shooting back at the screen and stuff, because it kind of blew their minds. And then that's 1902, and now we're in 2018, where people are getting more and more obsessed with VR, and where it's complete immersion.
That's a brilliant example of a technology that we've invented and only really many, many years later used it to its full potential in ways that we'd never even imagined previously. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things like that that are going to come out, and have come out, but are going to come out in years to come, where it's a great invention, but it's only in subsequent years that we really begin to discover how to use it to its potential. I think the internet, again, is another good example of that, because in the 90s it wasn't utilised at all, anywhere near what it could have, what the potential of it now shows us it has. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what can be achieved with the internet and what will be achieved 100%. With it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of so convoluted to the point where it's kind of, I think the most important thing is going to be, in terms of helping people change their ideas, not change their ideas, or just change their ideas and learn to cope with all this kind of just oversaturation of information and news every day kind of thing, is to do with the process. So in schools it should be mandatory that they learn a kind of a scientific process of, kind of seeing the claim and the evidence behind the claim, and then looking for ways that claim might not be true, and going through a whole process before they kind of jump onto a story or a potential thing like that. I think that's going to be becoming more and more necessary to kind of sort through everything. All this just oversaturation and stuff. But then the oversaturation is not necessarily. That's a crazy amount of. It's easy to see how kind of things like fake news and things that aren't necessarily true spread, because you're just scrolling down Facebook, you'll see 10, 20 different news stories, and you can't have the time in all the day to go through it, click on it,
fact check
read
everything.
it, judge whether or not it's factual, and then go through it and see all the evidence and the sources and all that kind of crap. It's like you can't. But then you'll read something ridiculous.
It's confirmation bias as well, isn't it? So people create echo chambers for themselves and surround themselves with people who agree with them on things, and it's so much easier to do that on the internet now. It's very, very difficult in more traditional social circles to surround yourself only with people who agree with you, which is why I think, certainly part of the reason I think why we're having such massive polarisation in politics and culture and things at the moment, just because people choose only to speak to people who entrench their own opinions.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah, the internet's certainly an interesting one. We've strayed a bit away from consciousness, haven't we?
Oh, we've lit through several different topics that can be talked about.
I've not really done any of them much justice, no, if we're being honest.
No, not in any way. Or even properly discussed them. We've just kind of like mentioned that it's a thing.
Skimmed them, yeah.
Definitely. But I'm sure we'll get better at focusing on a single subject and then staying to that. But
yeah. Consciousness, yeah. That is an interesting one.
Yeah, it's not necessarily something we can necessarily figure out right now, because it depends on so many different things. Because I mean, the whole mindfulness argument comes into it. Like, mindfulness is a new concept for me because I feel it really interests me, and I feel like, I don't know whether arrogantly so, but I feel like I have a certain level of mindfulness that I kind of arrived at unintentionally. And I didn't get it through any kind of meditation or active kind of thing, anything like that, which is the usual way people find mindfulness, and kind of realising that they're experiencing thing, and all your thoughts and you are just like a big long conversation with yourself that you kind of wrap in all the information you're taking into this in a conversation you're having with yourself all the time. And that's generally who people are. They don't necessarily have another voice or another perspective in their own head that sees that run through of conversation and be able to separate themselves from it and necessarily kind of...
Is that what mindfulness is then, as you would describe it?
I think so. Like I said, it's a new thing for me, but as far as I understand, I think mindfulness is like having almost a second objective voice in your head, or not even a voice, just an active thing that sees yourself and your thoughts as just thoughts and not necessarily who you are.
Well, in a certain sense, I suppose you could say your own head is an echo chamber, isn't it? Insofar as the only thing in there is your own voice and continually reaffirming what you say and what you think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think a certain level of mindfulness.
Mindfulness is a separation of that.
Yeah. So you can kind of objectively view your own opinions and your own state of mind and look at it that way. Yeah.
And the reason why I bring that up is, like, if mindfulness is important to consciousness, which I don't suppose it is, but thinking about it right now, but I would argue it's very important, mindfulness. But then, if our ideal definition of consciousness has mindfulness involved, I think it'd be a good argument for animals not being conscious, because animals have that one perspective of survival. I mean, every single living thing in the world has only one reason to live, and that's one drive in life is to keep living and reproduce, keep your species alive. At the very, very incredibly basic level, whether it's plants, animals, people, kind of thing. It's not a very good reason to live, and it's not really good motivation to keep going, kind of thing. But that's the initial, very basic, raw, primal,
fundamental biological reason.
Exactly. I mean, malaria and all those kinds of diseases all have the very same focus, so it's not a very good focus to have. So if our definition of consciousness comes to include a form of mindfulness, then I think there'd be a good argument that things like tigers, whose only intention to live is to eat food, reproduce and stay alive, survive. That's generally their only motivation. I'd argue that's not necessarily consciousness, that's just being.
Is that a something that's influenced by environment, though? I wonder. If you look at domesticated animals, they have emotions and desires beyond the purely biological, but that's because they've been taken out of the harsh environment that nature has conditioned for them.
Yeah.
So a tiger, if it was raised in captivity, I don't know that. I'm sure there's many people who work with tigers in captivity who could enlighten us on this one, but do they behave differently? Do they have personalities which aren't just defined by what biology tells them to think and to do, which is just to survive and reproduce?
Well, arguably the personality is the biology.
Yeah, to an extent, I think. But it's very difficult to remove the primordial persuasions from a person's personality, and that even in humans that's the case, but even more so in animals. But is it all of it? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's where the definition of consciousness comes into it. Whether that's kind of all you need for it, or there's a certain aspect of mindfulness which I think does change things. Otherwise, you kind of just exist in my estimation. You're just kind of there, and you're no different from a plant who's just trying to survive and keep spreading.
It's not even trying; it just does.
It just is. Yeah, exactly. That's my point. Yeah. I think mindfulness changes that for people. I think people are just. There's a lot of people out there that think they just are.
Yeah.
They're no different. They don't necessarily think why. They have justifications and stuff, but they just are. They have that one thought, that one conversation in their head, and that's them, and they run through life with that. But they don't. I think it's important to have a level of mindfulness that kind of. I don't know. It's very different.
I think one of the best kind of manifestations of free will and consciousness and mindfulness, as you say, is humans' self-destructive tendencies. Conscious self-destructive tendencies, I don't think mean necessarily things like taking drugs or living an unhealthy lifestyle, because we do that for our own reasons of enjoyment and things, and self-destruction is just a byproduct of that. But people who genuinely actively try and self-destruct is totally anathema to biological senses, but they do it anyway because they have the freedom to think and to choose these sorts of things in a way that I don't think many animals, at least, are able to do.
No. I think that does tread into the mental health area a little bit. It's not necessarily good.
Well, it does, yeah, but it's a lot of the time it's not that. This is a separate argument entirely.
It is. I mean, this whole self-destructive nature could be simple as just not looking after yourself, not being healthy.
Well, yeah, what I mean is that's obviously self-destruction is a byproduct of living an unhealthy lifestyle, whether people know it or not. But some people actively, people are capable of self-destructing consciously, wanting to do it, and it's not a reference to any sort of mental illness. It is possible for that to exist.
And things like that, not necessarily feel like they deserve certain things, or that's their
what I mean is, those urges and those desires are capable of overriding the biological desire and need to survive and reproduce. So I think that in itself is a symptom of consciousness and free will. We'll invite our avid listeners to contribute their thoughts on this matter.
Yeah, I mean, we've hit 30 minutes now, or just over. 34, not bad. I think we'll kind of slowly build it up, depending on we'll find a kind of a groove that.
Yeah, find a way of doing it.
Yeah.
Chop this little bit off the end.
I mean, no, we'll keep it in. It's the character. I don't think I'm going to do much editing to this. If any, I'm just going to stick it up.
Oh, fair. Okay.
So, I mean, at the moment, we're just kind of getting to grips with it, getting used to certain equipment.
This was episode 1.
Well, this is the last one was 0.1. This is 0.2.
Oh, right, okay. So when we get to episode 1, we'll hit the ground running.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have a full-on intro and everything to do with that, and we'll have it down. Okay. These first 9 or so episodes is going to be just us figuring it out, which I think is quite a good thing to
say one thing for sure, they're never going to say, I preferred their earlier stuff.
Guaranteed. Just raw and uncut. I mean, people, there'll be some people that prefer it, but raw and uncut. I mean, it could end up just being this, but we'll have an intro, we'll be a bit more streamlined in terms of the things we talk about. But anyway.
I think if we have plot points to follow, then that could be quite helpful.
Yeah, probably.
It's kind of bring it back, because we'll inevitably go off on tangents. I think that's just something.
Oh yeah, naturally. I
think
think
we just do.
I mean, I think it's a definite skill having a conversation, like
about something.
Yeah. Because most people just kind of listen and wait for the other person to stop talking before then they can throw in their own opinion. So you're just kind of talking outwards with someone there and having a break in between rather than just engaging with the actual things that they're saying. I'm very bad at that, and I've always been conscious to try and make a change, but I'm nowhere near good at it yet. But conversation's a skill, and I think we'll get better at it. We will get better at it.
Join us on this journey of self-improvement.
Just rambling, tangent-filled journey.